I don't always listen to the far left side of my party when it comes to these issues. In fact, I'm the one at the table arguing why this is good policy, and that if they came down to the ground and they saw what folks were experiencing, we could actually get things done and get things solved. My experience here is deeply rooted in the needs of the people, in listening to folks and understanding what their needs are. Now, I also don't compromise my values. I'm a proud Democrat, and I will tell anybody that comes and shoves that in my face, because I believe in a woman's right to choose, because I believe in sound immigration policy, because I believe that we all should have an economic opportunity that we currently don't have because of this establishment of the billionaires making away with all our cash and the wealth inequality that exists out there. So I'm going to continue to do that. But at the same time, when I go talk to folks, when you shake somebody's hand and you look them in the eye, that is a social contract that you make with people. And in New Mexico, it still means something.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote Podcast, coming to you again from one of the nation's best hotel rooms in downtown Manhattan. It is not near as nice with the palm trees we had last week, and I'm pretty sure if you could see what I'm looking out my window, I watched a couple fellas get killed in this alley last night. These floors don't even have carpet, Mike, because it's easier to clean up blood. This is what's going on in this hotel they put me up with in CNN in New York City. How's everything in Sacramento?
Better here than there. I looked about CNN's budget cuts kind of affecting its guest expenditures. I mean, I hope you're safe. You're safe.
Luckily, I'm a big, bald-headed Mexican. Not too many people mess with me.
Yeah, even in New York City. Well, it's good to have you. It's good to be to see you alive. Hopefully, that'll be the same situation next week. But we'll see how it goes. See how we behave.
And we're also excited to bring in a special guest. As you can see, we're doing and continuing our interviews with Latino VIPs. And this morning, we're recording this on Wednesday, as we always do. We have talked the congressman from southern New Mexico, my brother Gabe Vasquez, to come and join us. Gabe represents one of those districts that we always talk about. And I should call him the congressman. Me and the congressman are friends, so I call him Gabe because I'm trying to get him to let me come out there and go fishing. But that's going to be a conversation for a minute. But the congressman represents one of those districts, for those of you listening, you brown nerds that we like to refer to, as a district that he won by a few points in a year that was really shitty for Democrats, but Donald Trump also won the district. So it's a lot like that Arizona Senate race we talked about 2 weeks ago when we were interviewing Senator Gallego. But Congressman Vasquez, welcome to the Latino Vote Podcast.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate being here with you all today and appreciate the conversation. And you're welcome anytime in New Mexico. We just wrapped up a nice fishing trip for some Gila trout, an endemic species to the Gila River, which I've actually introduced legislation to protect for its wild and scenic qualities. So it wasn't all just fun. It was actually about legislation. But hey, anytime we can catch some of these wild Gila trout, it's pretty awesome.
Those fish will be safe, by the way. You take Chuck out there, those fish will be safe. There's no threat at all.
Come on now. We can stop the podcast right now because you can already see why he wins. Because when's the last time you heard a Democrat talk about going fishing as a congressional junket? And if Chuck Roach ever got elected, this is what the thing would be. Now we know. But let's get started this way, then I'll kick it to Mike. Give us a little bit of how you would open up to explain to folks who you are and how you got to Congress, because I think your story is so unique and not the normal. You didn't go to Harvard and your daddy didn't work in Congress. Give us that story.
No, I got denied by Harvard twice. No, just kidding. I got two scholarship opportunities when I graduated from high school in West Texas, southern New Mexico. One was to New Mexico State University, my alma mater, go Aggies. And the second one was to North Dakota State University. And after I looked up what the winters look like there, I couldn't do it. But look, I come up from a Mexican-American family. I'm the first in my family to be born in the United States. My grandfather comes from a small town called El Remolino, the whirlwind of Juchipila, right outside of Juchipila, Zacatecas. And he was a sugarcane farmer, a hunter, an angler, not out of a hobby, not because he did it for outdoor recreation, but because he needed to feed his kids. And he ended up having 10 kids, including my wonderful mom, who has supported me throughout my career and encouraged me to follow my dreams. But we never grew up with much. Just yesterday, actually, they're tearing down part of my grandma's house that my grandfather built by himself. And when I think about that, this is in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. When I think about that and I actually saw the pictures of the Adobe bricks that were laid on and stacked on top of each other, I see, even though my grandfather passed over a decade ago, I see the work that he put in to build his family. I see the work that he put in to raise 10 kids. And I see that hard work ethic that he delivered to his children, including my mom, who then passed it on to me. And so nothing was ever given to me. I've been working since I was 16. My first job was at a fast food restaurant. My second job was selling vacuum cleaners door to door. My third job was, working at a grocery store called Big 8 Food Stores in El Paso, Texas. And I've never stopped working since. I had to pay my way through school. I had to figure out what I was going to do in my career. And politics for me was never really an option. It was not a thing that my family talked about. My family just put their noses down. They worked really hard, and they were able to give me an opportunity eventually to be involved with my local community. And so I've worked in a variety of different jobs, and eventually, came to this realization that those sacrifices my family made for me are things that I should give back to my country and things I should give back to my community. So I started as a local city councilor in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which has been my home for over 20 years. And I get to be a member of Congress now, simply because I knew that I could outwork our former congressperson that was in this district, and I could deliver results to those folks who truly care about their communities. So just to give you an idea, Chuck and Mike, my district is bigger than the state of Pennsylvania. It includes 4 national forests, 7 tribal nations, 180 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border, a majority Hispanic population, and a lot of hard-working folks that are out there trying to make a damn living in this country today that simply can't make the math work for themselves or for their kids anymore. And so that's why I'm here, and that's how I find myself here in Washington, D.C.
That's a fantastic story, Congressman. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks again for being with us. I have always found New Mexico, too, to be one of the most challenging, fascinating congressional districts in the country. And I've read your name many times throughout the years and just kept wondering, who is this guy who's able to pull this off? So thank you for making the time. I do want to, we got some polling out today that shows for the first time ever, Donald Trump is upside down now on immigration, meaning more Americans disapprove of what he's doing than approve. And a lot of this, some would suggest, was predictable because even though people have this idea of border security, when you get down to the specifics of what he wanted to do, it always pulled pretty negatively. And as it's becoming real, those numbers are dropping. But one of the reasons New Mexico, too, is so tricky is you're on the border. And a lot of the districts in the Rio Grande or even in California and Imperial County get a lot of attention. Rubin in Arizona gets a lot of attention. New Mexico, too, there's a red-blue split, but there's also a cultural split. There's the seamlessness between Mexico and the United States, that are cultures that have been there for hundreds of years. I know I'm asking a big question, but what makes New Mexico so different, so unique, and so perplexing, especially for a Democrat right now, when you've got to go back to your caucus in D.C. and say, I know, I get it, guys, I'm with you on a lot of these issues, but you've got to understand what life is like in a border community in South New Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, look, you kind of nailed it on the head there. The history of the New Mexico border with Mexico is deep and complex, and it is something that we're actually very proud of here. Going back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, to the gas and purchase, one of the last parts of the United States to become part of the contiguous United States. We still fly the Mexican and American flags proudly in places like the Mesilla Plaza, which is where I live today. And we're very proud of the history of our farm workers. During the Bracero program, where folks essentially, cross through a cattle fence, a pasture fence, to come to this country and work in our onion fields and our chili fields, to the folks who have built our roads, who have made their lives here, who have made, wonderful generations of New Mexicans before this was even the United States. All that history matters because families remember that. In my family, the stories that I hear from my abuelo and from my abuela about what it was to live on the frontera and what it was and the responsibility that it took to become a United States citizen is something that's really important to me because we could only do it through hard work. There wasn't no special visas for us. There wasn't no high-tech visas for my family or for my, the folks. We all had to work to do that. And that's still the story of my family. My mom she worked as hard as she could, be the first woman in the entire family to graduate from a university in Ciudad Juarez. And eventually she worked for the maquiladoras and got an opportunity to have have citizenship in this country. And that's a story of a lot of families that are here along the U.S. Mexico border. And so, I go out to these big ranches that are out on the U.S. Mexico border, and I talk to folks out there. And guess who the ranch foreman is? Guess who the ranch hands are? They are hardworking Mexican people, and they say, these guys work harder than anyone else, and I appreciate them, and they do terrific jobs. And that's it, when you see people for what they are and who they are, and you're able to then go talk to maybe some of those ranchers who may have voted for Trump, and you say, you know what, we need H-2A visa reform, and I'm in Congress, and I'm going to introduce an H-2A visa reform bill to help support the onion industry and the chili industry, support the cattle growers. That only comes because I grew up on the land. I grew up on both sides of that wall with my grandfather and with myself, and that's still where I choose to spend my time. So it's an interesting dynamic that we have with both Arizona, California, Texas, and New Mexico in terms of what some of the Hispanic Mexican American politics are along the border. But out here, it's a very undeveloped place. We got three ports of entry: Antelope Wells, Columbus, and Santa Teresa. Antelope Wells probably sees maybe 50 people cross a day. Columbus, probably a couple thousand. And Santa Teresa, which is the burgeoning hub of international trade that continues to grow and to expand, sees probably about 12,000, 14,000 commercial trucks come on any given day, and produces the largest net exports for the state of New Mexico. And so the closer you get to Arizona and places like the Chiricahua Mountains, the Peloncillo Mountains, the Animas Mountains, you won't see a soul out there. I mean, it's just the reality, especially during the summer. And I know because I hunt Coues deer out there. I know because I spend a lot of time hunting Mearns quail out there, or Montezuma quail, as they should be appropriately named. And and so those are natural barriers that already exist across the border. And you can only know that if you spend your time there. If you're not doing some crazy photo op in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas,
Right.
with a bunch of Marines and stuff, you can actually go to a place like the Peloncillo, so you can go to the Animas Mountains or the Big Hatchet, the Little Hatchets, and see how difficult it would be for anybody to cross through that terrain anyway. And so there's a reality to living off the land, to what it is, what our history means to us as Southern New Mexicans, and people value that, whether you're white, Hispanic, whatever it might be. We're also home to the Buffalo Soldiers. We had Buffalo Soldiers in a place called Fort Selden, which is about 15 miles north of where I live today. And as I mentioned, we also proudly have 7 Native American nations, sovereign nations, in my district. So the rich history of this place allows us to be better neighbors to each other, allows us to have more respect for each other, and to have more respect for that immigrant story that is really rooted and based on hard work.
So I want to jump into, because I know we only have you for a limited amount of time. I want to ask some questions because the nerds on here that Mike has got all worked up about the Latino voter love to hear about pulling the curtain back about strategy. Now, you've been reelected twice in a district that was redistricted. That's literally one of the last 50-50 majority Latino districts in America. You come from a conservation background, a city council background. We get that. But talk about campaign strategy on how you won that first race and then reelection. I like to take our viewers back to thing that made me look at you for the first time is when I saw this announcement video, you sitting on the back of a pickup truck. I remember distinctly seeing a hunting dog there that I thought was very different from a Democrat that I had normally seen. And I was like, this guy may have a little Chuck Roach in him. I can relate with this guy. Let me find out more about this guy. Then we became friends and such. But what we don't know is explain and know this is the camp. You can go deep here on the nerd out on demographics, on strategy, but what was your strategy to win a red district, being this outdoorsman, being this Mexican family, Mexican immigrants, all the things? So take our viewers into that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Chuck. Look, I think I'll take it back to the most primitive thing that I ever felt in my life, which was, when I was about 9 or 10 years old and I gutted my first catfish. To pull those guts out of a catfish and know that that is going to feed your family, and have that understanding that sometimes you have to kill things to be able to feed your family, and you have to know where your food comes from. is the same approach that I take to politics. When I got to the city council in Las Cruces, and Congresswoman was in this seat, Freedom Caucus Republican, and I was working on fixing potholes. I was working on fixing streetlights. I was fixing on housing ordinance so that we could fix up some of the most blighted neighborhoods in my community, representing one of the poorest districts in my community, if not the poorest district. I needed help from my Congresswoman. And if she wasn't willing to help, then I was willing to run against her. And so it's that same kind of primal instinct of, you know what, somebody's got to get the job done. Somebody's got to put food on the table for folks. Somebody's got to go out and to these communities. And listen, a bunch of my friends are they were Republicans when I went to school with them. Whether they're game and fish officers or just folks that had different political viewpoints than me, and I learned how to talk to them. I learned how to work across the aisle and continue to be their friends despite their political differences. And so I knew that going into these same communities where, you know, uh, I enjoy spending time in the outdoors, I know what folks value out there, and it's all about hard work. It truly is about earning your keep, and I value that very much because my family did that. They taught me that, and so when it comes down to winning this race, and when folks said, you may not be the preferred candidate of the establishment, I said, just wait and see because I know more people in these rural communities than I think any Harvard educated candidate might know, and I promise you, I can make a connection with them, and we can work together when I get to Congress. And so now that I'm in my second term in Congress, the first Democrat to ever do this in over 50 years here in New Mexico's second congressional district, not only have I talked about those issues, but I brought legislation forth and supported legislation, common sense things like the Wolf Act that I sponsored with Greg Stanton for full depredation compensation for Mexican gray wolf kills, like the Fix Our Forests Act, as we face the two largest wildfires in New Mexico's history, including one in my district called the Black Fire, over 300,000 acres. And I don't always listen to the far left side of my party when it comes to these issues. In fact, I'm the one at the table arguing why this is good policy, and that if they came down to the ground and they saw what folks were experiencing, that we could actually get things done and get things solved. And so my experience here is deeply rooted in the needs of the people, in listening to folks and understanding what their needs are. Now, I also don't compromise my values. I'm a proud Democrat, and I will tell anybody that comes and shoves that in my face because I believe in a woman's right to choose, because I believe in sound immigration policy, because I believe that we all should have an economic opportunity that we currently don't have because of this establishment of the billionaires making away with all our cash and the wealth inequality that exists out there. So I'm going to continue to do that. But at the same time, when I go talk to folks, when you shake somebody's hand and you look them in the eye, that is a social contract that you make with people. And in New Mexico, it still means something.
And I love that. That last closing paragraph, need to bronze that, put that on a plaque. I often say, and this is a little bit crass, I often say that Latinos are sort of the moderates in both parties. But the truth of the matter is, we're the working class. And the working class focuses first and foremost on the ethic of hard work, which is really a cultural defining feature of our people, right? Is we're the workers, we're the builders. When you want something done, Mexicanos we're the ones that are going to get that building built. We're the ones that are going to get that business going. And to hear some of the values that you portray and that you talk about, where a handshake means something, your word is your bond, that comes from growing up in an agricultural rural area where you have to rely on one another more than you do in places where you're never going to see somebody else or do business with them again. Like you were saying, these people, they may live hundreds of miles away from me, but you know them as good friends. And to me, it is so emblematic of where the country was, where I think it needs to get back to, but it's also where both parties need to get. And so I guess what I want to ask Congressman is this: with that setup, where do you see the whole political system going? Are we getting better? Is it getting worse? And what role will Latinos play in either healing or being part of that growing divide?
Well, yeah, I didn't learn to speak English until I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I didn't even know I was a US citizen until I was around the same age. And so, for me, growing up with those certain challenges, it was tough for me. And there are second and third generation Hispanic families now in this country that may not learn the language, that may forget some of the cultural practices that their families and those folks who brought them here, practice. And that's just a reality that we have to face. Not every Latino is the same, but that doesn't make them any less Latino than we are. And that's really an important thing, I think, for our party to take stock in and to take hold of. And so in my district, as I mentioned before, which only I can speak to, because I don't know what's happening, in Miami, Florida, or McAllen, Texas, or San Diego, California. But I do know what's happening in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Santa Teresa, and Deming, and Lordsburg, and Silver City. And so, for me, it is really truly understanding your community. Um, Latinos want the same thing that every American wants. They want the opportunity to work hard, to have a good paying job, to have health insurance that's not going to make you go broke, to be able to send your kids to summer camp and wear the same uniform that all the other privileged kids wear during the summer, and to have the chance to make it in this country. I think those are the most important issues that we can focus on today as Democrats, and we shouldn't separate those into white issues or Latino issues. Those are economic issues that every American is facing today. And so I tell folks often that the border is as American as apple pie, right? And so the history that we have along here is a uniquely American story, and I embrace that story. I embrace who I am without having to go too far in any direction, but understanding what our folks want. And so, if we're talking about majority Latino districts, we can't say that they are either progressive or that they are conservative. They are American, just like anyone else, and it's your job as a candidate. It's your job to go out there and sell a vision, to be able to tell people what you will do for them if you are elected. And when you frame it that way, when you put it that way, I think it becomes just a lot easier to be able to then do your work when you get here to DC, or you get to a position as a state representative or county commissioner or city councilor, hell, soil and water conservation district supervisor. I mean, whatever it might be, it's everybody cares about these things. So we're going to continue to do that.
In our last 10 minutes here, I want to get to a question about, go back to the strategy piece. What folks should also know, me and Mike complain a lot about DC and LA and New York consultants. The congressman probably has more Latino consultants on his team, people of color from diverse backgrounds in any congressional race in America. And I know he had to fight hard to get that. And you should know, in full disclosure for everybody here, I'm not one of them. I've worked in this race in every one of his elections. So this is not a Chuck Rocha commercial. So back down. But I have worked in this race, spending as much money as his campaign on some very large IEs. And what I noticed, as I'm on the quote unquote other side of the wall, is that he has put together teams and messaging out there. And I want to know your role in that. When you got this group, thank you for living your values and putting together such a diverse collective of consultants. You can really tell. How do you guide that consultant who's Latino from Texas or Miami in making sure they're telling your story right? So other candidates that are listening now who may have to push back on their consultant some, but they never do because they're scared, because they think the consultants know it all. And we do for the most part, but we can be wrong. Let me be clear. Tell me the role that the candidate plays with a consultant for other young candidates out there who may be in your same position.
Yeah, I'd say to them, first and foremost, trust your gut. Trust your gut on who you hire, on who helps you build your team. For me, yo hablo español, and when I was thinking about my media strategy, I said we have to have the right folks on board for me to be able to deliver effective messages in Spanish, and that's different in New Mexico than it is in California, and that's different than it is in Florida, and that's different than it is in Texas. And so having that cultural competency and setting that out right at the beginning of conversations with folks about uh, how much will you be invested if you don't know about my district, and understanding what the culture is here, and how we operate and how we talk. Because Norteño Spanish, for example, is different than Chilango Spanish, right? It's different than Spain Spanish. And so if I'm getting stuff that's translated on Google Translate and it's being put into my inbox, and I'm spending hours trying to reformat all this stuff, it's not even worth it. I want to have folks with local experience. And so my last campaign, I brought folks from New Mexico on board that were extremely strong in their fields, may have not had the congressional experience of running a congressional race here in DC that meant so much, because the majority was at stake. But what I was confident in is that they could bring forth those relationships, those opportunities, the understanding of what it meant to connect with Nuevo Mexicanos in a way that was authentic and in a way that they knew my community. And it's a big ass district, so we got to have folks that know, the dairies in Roswell, the cattle ranchers in Reserve, and the oil and gas folks out in Hobbs and Jal, New Mexico. And if you don't know that as a consultant, then it's going to be very tough for you to win a race in this district. And that means, that folks on your team have to be invested in learning if they're not from the state. But most importantly, look, I'm all about cultivating local homegrown folks. The same way that I'm, didn't think I'd ever have the opportunity to run for Congress. There may be some kid out there that never thought he might be a campaign manager on a congressional race, but he's got the chops and he knows the people and he understands and he can learn. And so, go outside of the establishment per se in terms of, choosing the right people to work for you. And more than anything, choose folks that care about your district, know your district, and that are invested in you winning, not so much invested in what their next political, move might be.
So I say there's no other podcast in America where you can have a congressman explaining the difference between Norteño and Chilango Spanish. So thank you so much for bringing that up. For your campaigning and cutting ads. Love that. Love that. Give us a sense, Congressman, of where things are heading. What's the mood in the caucus right now as we head towards the midterms? I know that a month ago there was probably a lot of despondence and hand-wringing, but with this kind of own goal that the president has just completely, I think, at least in terms of public opinion, has completely stepped on a landmine of his own making. What is the sense? Like, where are you seeing the caucus now? Where is the Democratic Party heading? And how are you guys feeling with the midterms this early out?
And what advice would you give them?
Oh, thank you, Mike. No, first I'll say I'm probably one of the only members of Congress that crosses the border almost every time I'm back home in the district to see my abuela and my tios, which means I have tacos de tripitas or tacos sudados at a local puestecito. And at that point, I'm not a member of Congress. I'm a member of my family. And that matters just as much to me as being a member of Congress. And those are the experiences that I bring back here in terms of the realities of the frontera and the border. But secondly, look, I think we have a huge opportunity right now as Democrats to capitalize on what is happening politically from this administration. We have seen that the dysfunction 2.0 of this administration has really threatened our national security, our economic security, and that decisions aren't being made in the best interest of those hardworking Americans, the middle class folks that we should be lifting up, and those folks who want to get into the middle class. And so we need to get back to being the party of the working class and of the middle class. And I think we can do that. And now is the time to do that. So we have to seize on that opportunity, not just politically, but because it's the right thing to do. It's why I'm a Democrat. It's why most folks that are up here oftentimes sacrificing time away from their families and from their friends. And I'm sure they could all be having better jobs than this. We're here for a reason. And so Democrats right now really need to stand up for the middle class. We need to defend the attacks against Medicaid, against food assistance programs, which is something I'm doing serving on the Agriculture Committee, making the lives of servicemen better, which I do on the Armed Services Committee, making sure that folks who are exiting the service have access to GI Bill benefits, which I've done, making sure that we're smart and talking about border security and that we are talking about sound immigration policies that are actually going to help support this nation's economy, which is a dire contrast to what is happening with this administration's deportation force. Right? There's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. We can do the right thing on so many different issues, but we've got to have a plan. We have to have a plan for any number of things. And so I am part of several working groups here in Congress that helps address some of those issues and look forward to being able to have that opportunity to be a leader here and bring forward good immigration policy, good economic policy, good policy that affects farmers, ranchers, and farm workers at the same time. So I think if we focus on those issues and we carry that into next year, we will be good.
Congressman Vasquez, I want to thank you for being with us today. And I also want to thank you. You know, I serve on the board of the National Wildlife Federation. You've been a big advocate and helper to us in protecting wild animals and wild spaces. I know it's unique for you folks listening to see two Mexican dudes talking about being conservationists and talking about fishing for Gila trout, which I'm definitely coming out and I'm definitely writing it off for my accountant who's listening, and I'll be pitching some kind of business. Don't you worry. But I'm going to come out We're going to do some fishing together. Thank you for standing up for always what's right and showing other folks that there are regular people that can run for Congress. So me and Mike are going to continue the conversation. We appreciate you being here today. Well, Mike, I thought that was a fascinating conversation. And the reason I really wanted to push to have him on after Ruben is me and you talk about what's it take to win back and what's it take to win. And me and you gloom and doom, and I give myself as gloom and doom credit as I give you, is that things are really bad, but there are people out there doing it the right way. And I think telling these stories, I'm a fan of his just like I am of Ruben, but I think listening to him for 5 minutes makes people understand that there are still regular folks in Congress. And I'm curious what your reaction was to the things he was saying.
I was struck by that, to be honest with you. And again, somebody who's been looking at New Mexico too for a long time. Folks, just if you're not familiar with New Mexico too, this is where you are seeing, and again, this has been redistricted. This guy's won in essentially two different congressional districts that are enormous. They're huge. And if you look at, districts to district, the rightward shift of Latino voters has been marked. It's been significant. It's been measurable. Two very tough campaigns. But this guy is, he's out there doing the work, but you can tell just culturally, he's of that land. Like he's more of a New Mexican than he is a Democrat or a Republican or a politician. And that's what it takes is somebody from that district. You're not going to have a DC person walk in there and be able to help you on messaging. This guy gets it. I mean, he is it. And I think what was really most impactful was the fact that he said, it's important to me to be a member of this family, right, of his community, than it is to be anything else. And you can it oozes off of him. It's rare for any politician to be like that. And I dare say, especially with working class rural communities, it's harder and harder to find Democrats like that. So it's got to be a little bit lonely, I think, in that caucus. But you also don't get the feeling that he feels lonely or isolated. He knows who he is. He is who he is. He is from a hard scrabble, tough ground, live off of the fish that you catch, the game that you hunt, the food that you grow. You don't care much about DC folk when you're like that. They're not really that relevant to you. You're going to make it either way. You're just there to truly be a public servant. And I just loved who he is and what he brings to the table. Chuck, what did you think?
The thing that people should also know is that the powers to be in Washington, D.C. said that Gabe Vasquez was too left to win in this district when he first ran.
Wow.
Because he had been a city councilman. He had ran a nonprofit. He was a conservationist. They didn't take the time to look at what they saw he ran a nonprofit, but they didn't know he'd spent his whole life hunting and fishing. He gave everybody on this podcast a geography lesson on every mountain and stream in his district because he had been there, to Mike's point. You want to know why he performs 4 points better than the president did in his own district that's the difference of having a really good candidate who can get enough common sense Republicans who think about land and water and regular stuff the way he does, of how you make that difference. There's still probably 30% red, 30% blue. They're going to run to their corners and they don't care who the candidates are. But the sweet spot in the middle are folks looking to be like, well, I met him. He seems like a nice guy. We've hunted in the same place, right, Mike?
That 4% you're talking about, I guarantee you 80% of that small margin, and that ain't that small, by the way. 4% in this world is pretty big.
Good
right?
point.
But 80% of those people, I bet you have met him. I bet you they've met him. And so they're like, oh, I know that guy. I'm voting for him. I may be a Republican. I may like Trump. But I met that guy at the farmer's market. I met that guy out at the ranch. I met this guy, working on this, nonprofit that was protecting our streams or our mountainsides. That I bet you. And the fact that we run into the guy and have an interview with him at a retreat in DC with his staff tells you they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on how to work that district. That's all he is singularly focused on, is winning that district, because he knows it. And the more people that he gets out to, the more responsive his office is to constituents, the better he is liked in that district. 4% is a big number in New Mexico too, guys. That's a big number.
Especially in a place where there's no metropolitan area here for y'all.
Right.
Now, in every race that me and Mike talk about, there's some scale of a larger city that has city infrastructure where there's a bastion of liberal voters or young people. This district has none of that. The centerpiece of this district is Las Cruces of all places.
I was just going to say that. That's their big city.
And if any of you, and I love Las Cruces, but if you've been there, it ain't no big city.
No.
Now, there's some sprawling growth in the New Mexico side of El Paso. which is like night and day, and there's some tribes down there and others, and there's a lot of sprawl, if you will, into the desert there. So there's the other. And this also tells you, for all of you strategists, that he doesn't just buy New Mexico. Excuse me, let me start over. He doesn't just buy Las Cruces Media. Mike, now because of the expansion, they took this district. For those of you watching on YouTube, and if you're not watching on YouTube, and you should be subscribing on YouTube, everybody needs to be subscribing so you can watch this. This over here was Little Texas next to Texas, and this one on the left in my hand, for those of you watching, was Arizona. What they did in redistricting to make it instead of an R+5 district, they made it an R+1, is they took Little Texas and they moved it down and gave this part to northern New Mexico, and they moved a little arm up into southern Albuquerque. Because, as we just said, there's not enough people in El Paso and Las Cruces to make a congressional district with everything in between, so they have to go north. They used to get it in Little Texas, but they gave that to the northern district that used to be Ben Ray's, that's now Teresa Fernandez Ledger's race, and they went into Albuquerque. So the strategic part of this race that makes it very hard is you have to buy the Las Cruces media market, and then you have to buy a very expensive Albuquerque market to just talk to probably 20% of the viewership that's actually touching the district, but there's a lot of people in it. And then buy some Spanish and English in El Paso that, again, is a wasteful buy because you're having to talk to all of El Paso. So this is where the Chuck Rocha and Mike Madrid, this is where we've made our living. Is you've got to figure out how that dollar goes the furthest and what market and in what language do you buy, Mike, which makes this super complex.
Really tactical. This is where you separate a really, really good consultant who gives a damn, who's thinking just like that. That's really good thinking. As I was listening to you, I was thinking, you know what? I wonder, and maybe you know the answer to this, Chuck, or maybe not. I bet you could buy Spanish radio in Mexico and have that be a big impact.
Yes.
Tell me a secret no one's talked about.
I'm not talking about that on this podcast, but that happens a lot.
That's just brilliant, right? I'm thinking, holy shit, like when he's saying every day I go back, I'm in Mexico, I'm like, you ain't the only one, brother. There's a lot of them. You buy Spanish radio or Spanish TV in Mexico on the other side of the border, you're making an impact. That buzz is so seamless there. It's like the way we would go into, the way you talk to Puerto Ricans in the I-4 corridor in Florida is you buy on the island. You buy in Puerto Rico because the rates are so much cheaper and those families are talking on social media platforms. You can really, really flood the zone in Puerto Rico and have that bleed over into the corridor there in Florida. I bet it's the exact same in that New Mexico border there, because rates are probably really, really cheap too. Anyway, love the tactics there. Love the thing.
And I think that that's really important. And the reason that's why I brought up these consultants, right, is that I don't work for Gabe. He's one of my best friends. I've run the largest IEs on both sides of this thing for the cycle. We may end up doing some work directly for Gabe because I really think what he's something special, right? He's kind of like Ruben. Like Gabe Vasquez could easily be the governor or the senator of that state someday because he's so connected. You could see the message that he uses working in Santa Fe, New Mexico, working in northern New Mexico around the Navajo nations, working around Albuquerque, which still has a lot of outdoor spaces. And I think as we get into this cycle, me and Mike talk a lot about California 22. Well, guess what? All due respect to Rudy Salas, but Rudy Salas is no Gabe Vasquez. You need somebody like a Gabe Vasquez to win a California 22, right, Mike?
That's actually a really great observation. Yes, that's a great observation. And like I said, I obviously this is the first time I've had a conversation with Congressman Vasquez. I was struck by how much of his region he really is. That may sound a little bit overly simplistic, but as somebody who talks to and interviews hundreds and hundreds of candidates a year, this guy's legit. And he is who he is. And if he were to somehow lose election or decide, this is the kind of guy who would be like, I want to go focus on, my ranching interest. And you wouldn't be surprised at all because he's got a life and he is somebody outside of being a politician. That authenticity is what resonates in communities like that. He doesn't need to be a slick operator. He doesn't need to be all over this or all over that or demonstrate. He doesn't need to rub elbows with the rich people in the oil and gas industry in New Mexico, which, by the way, is the largest industry in New Mexico.
Oh, great point, Mike.
So Democrats who are busting chops on people who are pro oil and gas in New Mexico, you better be ready to lose House and the Senate seats if you think that there's going to somehow be Latino politicians who are anti-oil and gas. That ain't going to happen. And it shouldn't. That's the industry there. So thanks for bringing the congressman on, Chuck. That was a fantastic interview.
Next week we'll get back on our schedule. We'll be talking about the topics of the day, and there's no lacking of topics to talk about. I'm not going to hit them today, but next week I want to get in some to the New Jersey primary that's coming up in June, Mike.
Yeah.
They're starting to do a lot of spending there. I'm in New York today. I'm going to New Jersey later this afternoon. Going to be rolling out some new Univision polling where they have did a large sample of Latino voters in New Jersey. They obviously did the horse race, but I'm going to try to get some of that polling back and send to you, Mike, so that we can put up a few slides and show what Latinos in New Jersey are looking at as well. They're starting to spend money. There's already been $30 million by Democrats spent on super PAC and hard side. We'll get into that next week. Y'all know that if you follow me on Twitter, I'm really upset that no money has been spent yet in Spanish. I know Spanish is not at all, but if you're not even trying, then I wonder if you're really spending money in English targeting that. We'll have that debate next week. But the biggest thing that's happening that I got to talk about before we leave, which for 2 minutes, is you're going to be listening to this on Friday. Friday's the 24th. No, Friday's the 25th. And Saturday is the White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, D.C. There won't be some big comedian. Donald Trump is not going. But what everybody's talking about is the Brown and Bougie brunch that's happening, hosted by yours truly, your favorite Mexican redneck, Chuck Rocha, where we will be honoring some Hispanic journalists. Since this is going to be released on Friday, I'm going to announce today that on Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning, the Brown and Bougie Award, and we've named it after a famous Latina journalist. She was the first one. I'll get her name. We just came up with this a couple weeks ago. But those two awards are going to two fabulous journalists that have both been on this program. From the Washington Post, Sabrina Rodriguez will be getting an award from Brown and Bougie Brunch about her work and dedication to the community. And then also our dear friend Adrian Carrasquillo with the Bulwark is also getting an award because of his coverage of immigration in the Bulwark recently and really bringing light to a lot of what's going on. These two reporters are friends of Mike's, friends of mine. We're super excited to be there. Mike, I know you've been trying to get there. If you can't get there, don't worry. I'm going to try to get some audio maybe on my phone of people talking about the podcast. You got anything to add before we get out of here this evening?
No, quick interviews. We need to have Sabrina and Adrian back on the show after their awards. We want to talk about their awards and their work because, guys, they are doing really exceptional stuff right now. It's the importance of having people who know the community, reporting, covering, and telling stories about what's going to happen with the votes. Your event couldn't be happening at a better time, not just because of the Correspondents' Dinner, but because of the changes in polling. I can't wait to see what you've got from Univision, because I guarantee you that the slippage amongst Latinos away from Republicans back to Democrats is happening. I can't wait to look under the hood of those crosstabs and get into it, hot and heavy here and do what we do on the Latino Vote podcast, which is geek out, nerd out, and take a look at some of those numbers.
Everybody, thank you for listening this week. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe, especially on YouTube. The YouTube has really been kicking up. You should know that if you want to interface with Mike Madrid, he is personally, not one of his many assistants. He is personally going on there and talking to people on our YouTube channel. So you should make sure to subscribe so you could have a colloquy with our member here about that word. I learned that last night on CNN. The colloquies, all there. I had colloquy one time, but I went and got a shot and it quit. Anyway, I'll talk to you later about that. But thank y'all. Don't forget, if your mom and dad are still with us, give them a call. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you at Brown and Bougie, my friends.